my name is Jessica and I would like to welcome you to this session on how trauma and drug use is linked in the youth we are working with. This session will focus on what we can learn from other countries around the world. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on today and pay my respects to the elders past and present. So a bit about me, I've been working with children and young people and families for a number of years in rural and remote areas. The trauma has played a part in all of these families' lives, whether intermittently or intergenerational. Today we're going to look at studies from the UK and America, as well as one from here in Australia. We're going to look at the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire, as well as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're also going to look at what we can learn from these studies and implement here in Australia. Firstly, we're going to watch a video that links trauma and addiction.
Suffering can also feed on itself. Many victims of trauma try to cope through what's colloquially called self-medicating, and some can end up with substance abuse or dependence issues. Psychologists define addiction or dependence as compulsive, excessive, and difficult to control substance use, or other initially pleasurable behavior that begins to interfere with ordinary life, work, health, or relationships. This could mean over-consuming drugs or alcohol, or compulsively gambling, eating, shopping, exercising, or having sex. People with addictions may not even realize that they've lost control of their behavior for some time. Addiction can refer to a physical dependence, a physiological need for a drug that reveals itself through terrible withdrawal symptoms if the use stops or reduces, or psychological dependence, the need to use that drug or complete that activity in order to relieve negative emotions. People with addiction are sometimes stigmatized as pleasure-bound hedonists who have no self-control, but people often compulsively use substances or do things in reaction to stress and other psychological problems. For various reasons, they've been prevented from coping in other ways, or maybe they just never learned how. So in this way, addiction itself is often secondary to the more complicated matter of how a person deals with stress and difficult emotions, or what kind of stressful situations they've survived. Few will dispute that much of what makes addiction possible is chemistry, but people are different from their life experiences to their biological sensitivities, so people respond in different ways to different drugs and behaviors. Many people can drink casually or gamble once in a while without losing control, others simply can't. And people in recovery from addiction may also have different needs. Some will need to be completely sober and never again touch that drug or do that thing, while others may in time be able to regain enough control to use again in moderation. Likewise, some folks can kick the habit on their own, while others do better with or need support from professionals or support groups. Researchers in groups like Alcoholics Anonymous debate whether addiction is a mental illness, like a software problem related to thoughts and behaviors and feelings, or a physical disease, a hardware problem related to biology and genetics, or both, and even whether addiction and dependence are the same thing. Either way, it can be hard to recover from an addiction if you don't get the underlying problem treated. But some people believe that you can't treat the underlying problem without first getting the addiction out of the way. While this controversy too continues, many are moving toward a model of treating both at the same time, the so-called dual diagnosis model of treatment. Addiction that's rooted in deeper psychological issues, especially in emotional trauma like PTSD, often require some version of dual treatment to untangle both issues. The good news is, while PTSD and substance dependence may be distressing and complex, people can begin to heal given the chance and the resources. We're amazingly resilient creatures. When nurtured with the proper support and practice, we can overcome a lot. Today we talked about...
So the first studies we're going to look at today are from America. First one is from Gillespie in 2017, and this one looked at the use of marijuana and cigarettes as a coping mechanism to deal with trauma or mental illness. So ACE, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences that we're going to look at on the next one, scores of 4 or more meant young people were twice as likely to smoke and 7 times more likely to be alcoholics. The trauma experienced by young people changed the chemistry of their brain. It increased their cortisol from the constant flight or fight response they were having, meant that they had a higher chance of substance use and addiction. And there was a need to create resilience and connections to overcome this substance use and addiction. The next study by Bernstein, Glazik, Lawrence, Bernstein and Srennen in 2011 looked at the patterns of risk and resilience, as well as whether youth were drinking to chill or drinking to cope. Those that were drinking to cope were generally from a low socioeconomic area, had lack of goals and or the ability to envision carrying out these goals. They also typically had a lack of support. This is a copy of the Adverse Childhood Experience questionnaire that you can easily find on the internet. Scores of 4 or more are considered high. So if you have a look, it looks at your physical and emotional and psychological abuse and neglect that has either been experienced or witnessed. Moving to the UK, Pates and Hooper in 2007 did a study where participants were residents in the UK secure children's homes. These young people come from a criminal background and or were in need of protection from themselves or others. So often they already had a history of drug use and mental health diagnosis before entering the homes, and they had experienced severe traumatic events. Young people with an ACE score of 4 or more were 4 times more likely to be a high-risk drinker, 6 times more likely to smoke tobacco, 11 times more likely to use cannabis, and 16 times more likely to use cocaine or heroin. They use a trauma recovery model in these homes, which is a form of a multidisciplinary approach. They see the important impact attachment disorders have on a young person's social and emotional functions. So go back to the basics to assist young people to learn how to develop a secure attachment and the then positive effects on their social and emotional well-being. Pates and Hooper also talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs or working with high-risk young people. Staff work to ensure a young person's basic needs, the lower needs, are met before moving up the pyramid. Normally this would take longer than the young people were in the program. The lower needs are a person's basic needs, their physiological and safety needs. Once these are met, that they can then focus on their psychological needs, which is your belongingness and love needs, as well as your esteem needs. Once all these needs are met, you can finally move to the last level, which is the self-fulfillment needs. This is self-actualization. Moving back to America now, in Crimmins, Cleary, Brownstein, Spunt and Worley did a study in 2000 that was based in a prison setting and found that drug use was linked to the regulatory system, and if the original trauma is not resolved, it leads to bigger problems. Drugs such as marijuana, alcohol, tobacco, powder, cocaine and inhalants are the most popular for self-medicating. The study found there was a strong association between trauma and cocaine use. It recommends that clinical interventions need to be specifically focused to address that particular trauma that occurred and to be aware of the potential triggers. Meanwhile, Williams et al. In 2008 did a study that found youth who have experienced high traumatic stress respond differently to outpatient substance abuse treatments than those who haven't experienced the stress. It also showed that they had a greater improvement over time than those who didn't. The treatment addressed the basic needs, built trust and rapport while establishing stability. This links back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The treatment was basically about teaching youth new coping skills rather than drug use. Moving to Australia, Spooner, Flaherty and Hommel in 1993 did a study. So while this is an older study, it found that young people were the age group at greatest risk of death from drug use, and drug use was the biggest cause of death in youth. Australia has moved from a drug policy focused on elimination of drugs to a policy focused on minimising the harm of drugs. Marijuana was the most popular illicit drug use, followed by amphetamines, with heroin being the least popular. Alcohol use was excessive, however, in all participants. This study suggested that drug programs have a specific youth focus and include education for all youth. So what can we learn from these studies and take forward is that you can't just work with the drug use and addiction. You need to look at the whole picture. You need to ensure a young person's basic needs are being met first. So on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, working on those lower levels before working towards self-fulfillment. It is important to address the trauma at the same time as the addiction and ensure that the young person has adequate support systems in place. Here are some other studies that may be of interest to you. Here are the full links to the studies that we have discussed today. I would like to take this time to thank you for your attendance. I hope you found this session useful and it has given you some ideas that you can use in your daily practice working with young people who have experienced trauma and substance abuse.